Hello, everybody. Happy Tuesday, and welcome to another discussion in Positively Connected in Dogs. Today, we have a very fun and special guest with us, Erin Marion from Down to Earth Doglady, which I absolutely love that name. That's just fantastic. Erin, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I really, really appreciate it.
Yeah, so today we're talking about something very cool, which in my opinion and my experience, there's not quite enough information out there. And that is, how do we raise puppies and teenagers that might have some impairments? Because oftentimes there might be specialized rescue groups that take care of these puppies. Sometimes people don't even know that they're adopting or buying one of these puppies. And then they're left with a whole bunch of questions and not a lot of information on how to deal with that. So before we jump in, Erin, do you mind sharing a little bit about your company and kind of how you got started in training and in this kind of special area of interest?
Yeah, so I always joke that I kind of have the cliche dog trainer story of adopting the naughty dog.
Yeah.
I was 19, which looking back, I'm not sure if I would advise a 19-year-old in college to get a dog, but I adopted kind of the special case rescue pup, the dog-to-dog aggression, the separation anxiety. And so I was already at Colorado State for animal behavior and for basically ag school. Once I had Temple Grandin as my teacher one semester, it kind of changed everything. So a little bit of mentorship from her, really utilizing my dog, and then attending Karen Pryor. I really just kind of hit the tarmac running about 11 years ago in animal behavior. My uncle was also an elephant trainer, so it's been,
That's cool.
So he worked in multiple zoos and would go to Thailand. And so growing up, talks of animal behavior and training was always kind of a thing. So when I got to Karen Pryor, it really kind of pushed the positive reinforcement aspect and going in that direction. And then about 4 years ago, I became totally obsessed with my local rescue, Deaf Dogs of Oregon. And they created all these amazing bandanas and dog beds, and I just started off going broke for them first because I was like buying all these really great training products. And then I started volunteering, and then I started fostering, and it just completely changed my life on how I viewed dog training. And I was so dependent on a clicker and so dependent on my voice that it challenged me in a way I had never been challenged before. And it's all hand signals. And then once I got my first deaf and blind puppy, which to this day was still one of the hardest dogs I've ever came encounter with, it once again changed my life on how I viewed dog training, with touch cues and really getting to learn their body language as much as they learn ours, and really using scent and all different aspects that I had never considered before because I was so dependent on sound.
Yeah.
So it was a really life-changing experience throughout the last 10 years to start off with going one avenue and just having dogs teach you something, and you kind of go the next avenue is a really kind of a beautiful thing.
Yeah, I think that's really cool too. As you know, I also have the Karen Pryor Academy background. And so I'm very big on clickers. I'm very big on marker-based training. But one of the coolest things that I've seen you do with your puppy and kind of following along on your journey with her is that you're still using marker-based training. So all of the science and all of the research behind using markers, using positive reinforcement training, it can still be applied to our puppies with impairments. We sometimes just have to be a little bit more creative about it, which as trainers, that's something that we are kind of constantly learning, is how to be more creative, how to take what we know and apply it in different ways. But I think that our training background and being able to bounce ideas off of colleagues makes that a lot easier for us than the general public when they're bringing home their first puppy, with impairments.
Well, and someone from Deaf Dogs of Oregon, Gay Wakeland, that I worked with, she always said to me, she goes, most of the time, no one has ever tried to talk to these dogs, and so and some owners can go most of these dogs' lives and not really try to communicate with them. And they they pick up on so much of your body language, more than probably you realize,
Mhm.
that you have, like you said, you have to get creative to be able to have effective communication. You can try and
Yeah,
talk to them, but you have to be effective, and it's your timing and what you put into your puppy and learning their body language of when they have to go to the bathroom. What are their little signs before they might react, that, like I said, make that effective communication and make it stick.
right.
And those marker cues are a way to just let them know, yes, yes, keep doing it. You're doing the right thing. Take that next step. And it's a beautiful thing to watch, honestly.
It
I don't know if
oh,
I
I
could
know.
adapt like they.
I watch you every time you post a new video of you working with your puppy. I'm like, yes. I click on it. I turn on the sound, even though, of course,
No
there's
sound.
no clicker to listen to. But watching you guys communicate and watching her figure things out really is just a beautiful thing. And I love what you said about being able to communicate effectively, and how a lot of the times I think this probably would be considered like a misunderstood
Mhm.
um, category of dogs. And so I can't even
Very
imagine how
much so.
frustrating it must be for them to not be able to clearly communicate with their people, because already we're a different species from them.
Totally.
But for people to even further not be able to understand and communicate is huge. And so for me, watching along your journey so far with Darla has been really, really beautiful to see.
Thank you
So
so
for
much.
everyone tuning in, we are talking today about puppies and teenagers with impairments. So if you have questions, please feel free to drop them in the comments and we will get to them. And if you have anybody that you know who might be living with a puppy with impairment, please feel free to tag them. So before we kind of dive into what impairments are and what they might look like, can you introduce us to your dog
Yeah.
and a little bit about this puppy that I've been watching you train?
Yes, definitely. So Darla her birthday is on Monday. She's a year old. Darla is a product of an oopsie litter. So, and we will talk about impairments and that, but basically, very quickly before we dive into, she's a product of a double Merle breeding, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. But the breeder found, I specifically was searching out a dog with an impairment for the sake of that. This was such a passion of mine. And I do want to put it out there that I don't necessarily, the breeder went out it a very beautiful way. You really shouldn't support this type of breeding. I really kind of always want to put that out there, that I feel thankful for Darla, but it was an oopsie situation. So yes, we found her. The breeder found us, knew I was a trainer, and did a beautiful job of interviewing us, making sure she was going to go to the right home, that she wasn't going to be a bait dog or something like that.
Right.
Because we do have, unfortunately, in Pennsylvania, a lot of we have a big problem of dog fighting. So we brought her in, and my partner and I had talked. My partner and I, my partner had never brought home a deaf and blind puppy, and we had a huge conversation, which is something that I really push: is, are you ready to bring in a dog like this? Because as much as I advocate, they are normal dogs, and they're just like any other dog. There are some safety concerns and some training
Mhm.
tweaks you have to make. So she came to us. She is fully blind and she's partially deaf. So I do feel thankful that she has some hearing, but I cannot bank off of that. I
Right.
cannot. I like to go forward thinking she's totally deaf and blind, or I'm going to rely on that hearing a little too much and it's going to get me into a bad situation. So she is an Australian, a full bred Australian Shepherd, and I feel very thankful. I feel she has been a very easy dog to train, in a
Yeah.
sense of deaf and blind dog training. She has the heart of, like a warrior. She's just
Yeah.
she's very courageous. She has a beautiful adventurous spirit. We're very outdoorsy people. We hike,
Mhm.
we canoe, and she's just along for the ride. And as much as we do have to make sure we set her up for success, she does great. She
Yeah.
does bump into things.
Yeah.
She does have to map out her area, but overall, she's a very playful dog. She's very helpful to me in dog training lessons. Um, she has an energy about her. I don't know if I'm not quite sure if dogs can pick up on that she's deaf and blind, but when I work with reactive dogs and I use her as the demo dog or the dog, the practice dog, they don't seem to react to her as much. I think it's because she's not staring at them. I think
Right.
it's because she's kind of aloof and looking, kind of smelling around. So I think overall introducing her, I'm just very thankful for her.
Yeah.
And where my business started with my dog Otis, where I advertised to people of having the troubled dog. It's now a beautiful thing that I am now in the second chapter of my business, and she's a huge part of it. So
Yeah.
um, overall, she's great, and I thank you for letting me introduce her because I can't say
Yeah,
enough
she's
about her.
special. She's special. Well, and one of my, we're big outdoorsy people too. And one of my favorite things to watch, not only the training process and how you guys are communicating with one another, but to see that she doesn't, having a puppy with impairments that turns into a teenager, that turns into an adult, doesn't mean that you have to be homebound. And it doesn't
No.
mean that your dog can't enjoy fun things. I mean, you guys are going out and she's swimming and she's hiking and she's exploring all kinds of really fun places. And I think that that's so important for people to see that, yes, it's going to create different environments for
Yeah.
training. It's going to create some new challenges. There's going to be some learning curves, but puppies with impairments still can have a very adventurous and fun-filled life, which I really love
And if
seeing.
and if anything, it is so cool to watch. You
Yeah.
sometimes my partner and I will just we don't even have the TV on and we just watch the way she just it moves around and explores her environment. And I don't want to say it's also naturally her. We have done a lot of work, and like
Right.
I keep saying, we'll keep talking about that. But it is a lot of work to make sure you set them up for success. But once you
Yeah.
have the tools in your tool belt, and you can say, okay, do I use the wrench in this situation? Do I use the hammer in this situation? Once you kind of understand your dog, and it'll take a while to really learn your dog with any dog.
Mhm.
But moving forward, now that we're creeping slowly into adulthood, out of teenagehood, I feel prepared to take her more places, even during a
Mhm.
pandemic. Um, and she and knowing that she can handle it as long as we don't push it too hard. But I would say that with any dog, and that's what I
Right.
love is that I've had people say to me, oh, I feel so bad for her, or oh gosh, that's really sad. And the first thing I always say is, please don't. She is
Yeah.
happier than a lot of dogs that I know that can
Yeah.
see and hear. And the feeling bad for them is actually what sometimes gets them in trouble, because people baby
Mhm.
them and coddle them too much, that they don't let them explore and map out their settings. And it's just like a
Yep.
toddler. You have to let them scrape their knee every once in a while.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. So, as you're working with your own puppy and working with clients, what kind of let's kind of define what impairments are and look at some of the cases that you have seen.
So the main I would say the main reason for impairments would be bad breeding, or just breeding genetics that aren't supposed to be bred together. So the biggest one would be a double merle. And what that means is when you have a merle coated dog, such as an Australian Shepherd, a Great Dane, pit bulls even have the merle gene. Unfortunately, the merle gene is becoming more and more popular.
Mm.
You're starting to see it in Frenchies, and it's scary to think
Yeah.
about. And so it also can happen with dogs that have the piebald gene, which is like your beagles, your
Mm.
hound dogs. It really can happen in a widespread of dogs. And most of them happen at birth. And what will happen is the most common one, I would say, is complete deafness. And why that is because the merle gene completely washes out the color of the coat type. So that's how you get that kind of beautiful gray with those black spots. And
Mhm.
it is a beautiful coat type. And that's the problem. so
Mhm.
so what happens is they get this almost now this I don't want to use the word albino, but for the sake of understanding what it looks like, it's almost an albino look. You've got light pigmented eyes, a full washout of the coat, and maybe a spot or two. As you see on Darla, she has the spot on her eye, but overall she's kind of got almost that like albino look. uh, and then if there is vision impairment, um, it's because they have what's called microphthalmia. So microphthalmia means the eye sockets are physically, or the eyes are physically too small for the eye sockets themselves. So the eyes sink back. And that leads, like what Darla has, is her third eyelids, or her eyelids in general, are just covering the eyes completely.
Mm-hmm.
So when you have, because the reason for the deafness is also it washes out really any blood flow or anything to the ears, which is what will cause the deafness. So that, when you don't see a double Merle coat type, but you see an impairment, that it can get a little scarier, because that can mean sometimes a serious neurological issue.
Mm-hmm.
So if you see a regular, say, a Doberman colors, and you have blindness and deafness, that can be a little bit scarier, and that right away you need to seek out veterinary care. And it gets expensive. You're looking
Mm-hmm.
at MRIs, you're looking at everything to really see what's going on. So impairments, like I said, usually or at least what I focus on, is visually impaired, hearing impaired, but there is also mobility issues. There's tons of different things that can cause for an impairment.
Mm-hmm.
I think the two that need the most tweak in training is deafness and blindness,
Mm-hmm.
especially when you have both of them. And even in these cases, you still have to consider some neurological issues as well. Seizures are common, whether they're, people want to say they're not. Seizures are very common with these dogs, need to be monitored uh, closely,
Mm-hmm.
and other things that can happen. We'll go more into it, but there are some aggression issues that can happen very easily, more than the average puppy, resource guarding, things like
Yep.
that. But to go back on topic, that's what I would really define, or what I at least try to specialize in, is deafness, blindness, or if you have both.
Yeah. And I think it's important to note too that the level to which a puppy could be deaf and blind varies. They could have
So much.
partial vision and be totally deaf. They could be totally deaf and blind, or like in your case, with Darla, be totally blind but have a little bit of hearing.
Yeah.
Does that impact how you're handling each case, or do you generally, I mean, to some extent, I'm sure you do customize everything, but do you ultimately always want to have a backup plan for if all sense is lost?
That's a super great question. Yes, I will always say you should have two ways to communicate with them. So, for instance, with Darla, we utilize the hearing because it's awesome that we have that, but we cannot just bank that is, we have to have other ways to communicate with her, because one day that hearing might go.
Mhm.
So, to just quickly go back right away, something I would recommend is, if you're questioning if your puppy has an impairment, is to either get a bear test, and that's BAER. Most veterinarians don't offer it. You're going to have to kind of seek out a special veterinarian to be able to, but it's a way to test the hearing of the dog. Other ways are obvious,
Yeah.
banging things without scaring them,
Right.
really trying to figure that out. And with the blindness, I really suggest, if you are questioning how much vision your dog has, is to take them to the ophthalmologist. You may never have to go back again, or you may have to be a frequent customer, but either way, to just get an idea of how much
Hmm.
vision that you think your puppy has. We thought Darla had a pretty decent amount of vision.
Yeah.
Went to the ophthalmologist, and it's like 1%. So yeah, so we were actually quite surprised,
Yeah.
but it was good to know, because I would have maybe tried to utilize that, what
Right.
I thought was vision, and then would have kept taking steps back in the training, and even poisoning some of my cues,
Right.
because I was trying to utilize something I didn't have.
Right. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And I love the idea of seeking out medical assistance from the start if you're not sure if your puppy has any impairments, because that information is really important in terms of medical help that your puppy might need if you end up, having dry eyes or
Yes,
something as, secondary to blindness. And it's going to help you with your training plan, like you just mentioned, of not accidentally banking on the puppy having functionality in certain areas to then only find out, oops, I've been making training mistakes and now I'm starting from square one again.
totally. I had a client even last night who has a Great Dane, and I encouraged. She was doing such beautiful work with just hand signals, but that there was only one good eye. And I just
Mhm.
said, it gives me bad feelings to just strain that eye so much.
Right.
I would love for you to have a second way to communicate with her, especially if she's nervous and you need to be able to maybe do some calming techniques and you can use touch cues. I don't want to keep straining that eye or putting more, especially because she's one of the dogs that has a history of seizures. So
Mhm.
that was one thing that I was like, let's make training a little easier for her so she's not straining so much.
Yep. Now, I know that we're going to dive in a little bit more into training and enrichment, kind of talking about the overview of the process and how we can really help these puppies and teenagers live their best life.
Yeah.
But before we do that, can we talk a little bit about some of the struggles maybe that we are facing with these dogs,
Yeah.
which obviously we're then going to talk about the solutions a little later on. But obviously, having a puppy with some of these challenges, like you said, could result in different behaviors, like resource guarding and
Yeah.
fear being more of an issue, which to me makes sense, right? Because if we can't
Yeah.
experience the world in the same way, we might be more worried, feeling more vulnerable. And again, I'm kind
Yeah.
of putting emotions into the puppy here, but can you
It's
talk to
very
us
true.
about some of the behavior changes that you might see, or different concerns we might have to take when we're working with puppies like this?
Yeah. So that's a great point. So, right off the bat, something you really have to focus on is resource guarding, especially fully blind, fully deaf. They can't hear you coming. They can't see you
Yeah.
coming. And most of the time, if they came, so let's talk two avenues. If they came from a breeder that did all the right things and was a good breeder in a sense of making sure the puppy didn't they didn't put it out in a burlap sack or something like that, which
Right.
has happened.
Right.
Then you sometimes it's just litter mates will beat them up and push them to the side, and so they get feisty over, I want the food and I have to make myself known that I'm going to get that food.
Right.
Unfortunately, these dogs get the other side of the railroad tracks, and you get a lot of rescue pups that have just had horrific beginnings, to be honest.
Yeah.
It's been only about 10 years since we even have been saving these dogs. This is not, there's not a lot of information because we didn't save these dogs, is really
Yeah.
what it is. So, um, those dogs that really had to fight their way to get what they wanted, you really have to keep a lookout to human aggression as well.
Mhm.
It's not just dog to dog aggression, it can be human aggression as well. So, resource guarding can be a big one. Startling is a really big one. So, one of
Mhm.
the things right off the bat you have to practice is waking up peacefully, and not being, because it's, some people will say, well, I think he can hear. I think he can hear me, banging these things. And it's more so they can feel the vibrations on the
Right.
ground, or their touch sense is so heightened and their sense of smell is so heightened that that's what you have to think about. Once again, you have to think of certain smells. So um, this is not putting any negative to, but sometimes cigarette smoke, if they haven't smelled it before, sometimes just a person's general new smell, it's new smells entering the room, something you may not even perceive could be scary. Darla, I think you remember, went through a phase where she was reacting to
Mhm.
just what seems like nothing. And I hear this quite often, actually.
Yeah.
And so you really have to think nitty gritty. I talked to some fellow deaf and blind dog trainers, and the heater kicking on, the sound, the vibration, the smell, the burning dog hair if you have dogs in your house, little things that you just wouldn't think about. And
Yeah.
that's why that course from Temple Grandin actually has helped me more now than ever, because you really have to think of sensory overload with these dogs. And if anyone has ever worked with autistic children, sensory overload and thinking of creative outside of the box outlets is what really applies here as well. So startling, resource guarding, new smells, dog to dog introductions or dog to dog play, you
Mhm.
really have to monitor because they don't know how hard they play. And sometimes they either kind of get their butts kicked a little bit and don't realize how to say no, or they're the ones that are playing way too hard because they
Yep.
can't hear and see the body language of the other dog.
Yeah.
So uh, you have to think of your house right off the bat. Whenever I talk about bringing a deaf and blind dog home, you have to think of your house and sharp corners, stairs, wood stoves,
Mhm.
things that you, Darla, we have this one coffee table that is like way too low to the ground. And we had to put little cushions on the corners because she just kept kind of bumping into it. And so thinking of things like that and setting them up that way, they will pick up and map the house very quickly, but you have to help them out a little bit too. You
Yeah.
want to set them up for success.
Yeah. That's an interesting idea. Well, two things. One, the sensory thing. I think with all dogs as trainers, we often hear this behavior is happening out of nowhere. And
Yeah.
oftentimes that's not true. Oftentimes there is something triggering it. I mean, that is
Hmm.
behavior, right?
Yep.
Antecedent
Yeah.
behavior
Literally.
consequence. Yeah, there is something that is making that
Yeah.
happen. But I think what I imagine would be the challenging part about working with puppies with impairments is that you have to get even more creative because the senses that they are picking up are likely things that we aren't picking up. I mean, my
Yep.
husband really has to be stomping on the ground for me to be able to feel vibrations in the
Yeah.
ground. But if we have a puppy that is blind and deaf, like you said, they're going to be much more sensitive to those vibrations where I might go, what the heck just caused that? But
Hmm.
it was something I didn't even pick up on. So I think
Yep.
that that's really interesting. Um, and I love the idea of setting the house up for the puppy
Yeah.
as well. Maybe using management a little bit
Hmm.
differently with a dog or puppy like this than we would with a puppy that can see, where they know they're going to run into something versus these puppies who might not pick up on that.
And management is really the most important thing in the beginning months with these dogs, especially if you have another dog in the house that can see and can hear,
Mhm.
because it will take your other dog to understand that there's something a little different about this dog.
Right.
Our dog at first, Darla would run into Dahlia all the time, and she would just be like, "Get a grip on yourself, girl." So you really have to advocate for your other dog as
Yeah.
well. And that's a really big thing is that people can kind of get sucked into is you have a bleeding heart for these dogs. A lot of people, first off, they're really beautiful dogs. And that's one reason people get in trouble is because they want this all white, kind of like
Mhm.
really beautiful dog. Then the second thing people get in trouble with is they baby them and they coddle them. And then you almost demonize your other dog for not realizing,
Right.
that there's a difference. And that's not fair either. So management is a very, very crucial part to
Yeah.
helping everyone out in the family. Um, and really children need to be considered as well. So I know a lot of rescues make sure it's the right puppy that goes to a
Mhm.
family because sometimes children can be overwhelming for these dogs as well. So
Oh,
man,
absolutely.
management is just not even for the puppy but for everyone else in the household is really a key component.
Yeah. Something interesting you touched on there was Darla running in to Dahlia all the time. I could
Yeah.
imagine that for some dogs, especially dogs who might be a little bit more sensitive about their space, this could be quite disruptive for them.
It was a
Um,
big problem, yeah.
Yeah. Do you find yourself, with your dogs or with client dogs, in that case, doing, a combination of management and counter conditioning with that to help the other dog adjust to it as well, besides just preventing it?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, big time. So Dahlia is also a special case in a sense that Dahlia has always, and I do want to point out, we thought Darla was going to be fully deaf, and I would have never did a rhyme scheme name wise like that if I realized how much hearing the dog had, because now we get the dog's names messed up a little bit, and thinking back, I'm like, okay, maybe it should have been a little bit different. I have a lot of people that are like, why did you name him like that? And I thought she would be totally deaf. So I did want to put that out there. But going back on topic is, so Dahlia has always had a space bubble. So in my brain, and I don't know if you can agree with this, when you have female cattle dogs or female working, breeding, you have two avenues of them. You have the complete diva or the complete working dog tolerant dog, or you have the bouncy wiggly butt that everyone's kind of used to seeing, right? I have both of those. So I have Darla is the wiggly butt, and I will say Dahlia is, she's a work dog. She came from a farm, she's got working lines, and she's dog tolerant. So we
Mhm.
knew when we brought in Darla, we were going to have to use management to a key. So if you are somebody that really wants to bring home one of these dogs, but your other dog may or may not take to it, management is key. And like you said, counter conditioning. So it's been since April now, and we have improvement, but are they
Mhm.
going to be best friends? No. The one thing I do love is that I think without Dahlia, Darla would be kind of a hyperactive puppy. I think she would not know an off button. So
Mhm.
when they are we choose when we put them together, when they've both been exercised, they both have had an outlet, whether that be a training session, a hike. We went on a hike together. We do a lot of bonding activities, so
Mhm.
hikes together, traveling together, walks together. And in the home where Dahlia has more of the space bubble, we use management. And I think we will always have to use management.
Yeah.
And I also want to advocate to anybody in this position that it's very important your other dog gets a break from your deaf and blind dog,
Yeah.
especially if your deaf and blind dog is persistent. Um, I always say to people, you want the other dog to feel like they can say something, but the puppy doesn't need to get its butt kicked in the
Yeah.
process. I'm not about that. So, Dahlia goes to my parents a couple times a week just for the day, just
Mhm.
to be with grandma and grandpa, have some chill time, get away from it all. And it is a lifesaver. And I think
Yeah.
anybody who has a dog who's 7 years old and has been around dogs its whole life deserves a break like that somehow.
Yeah.
So that's it. The counter conditioning is usually, and positive interactions are, we always have Cheerios around, or we always have easy little non-smelly treats, because that's another thing you have to think about is scent is huge, and the
Yeah.
dogs know when you have treats on them. So when they are good together, even to this day, it'll always be a little yes,
Yeah.
good, good girl marker, or nothing at all, and just a quick reward to let them
Yep.
know, thank
We
you for
like
being
this.
so calm around the puppy right now. Yeah.
Yeah. I think that's really important with multi-dog households. As trainers, when people are looking to bring in a second dog, they often say, "Well, I wanted a playmate for my first dog." And I think that that would be
Yes.
a big pause moment, because bringing in a puppy with impairments absolutely has to be a decision that you're making for you and not for the other dog, as it should be with any puppy that we're bringing in. And then I also think that, again, we have two adults right now. We're going to be bringing in a third at some point.
So
And
exciting.
management, there are moments where everybody's together, like you said, and we're encouraging and reinforcing calm behavior. We're letting them know that we like them to be relaxed around one another.
Yeah.
And then there's moments where we use management to keep them separated during different things. And I think that it's important for everybody to understand that, even no matter, I mean, my two right now, like, if Lennon could just merge with Lucy, he would be the happiest boy.
So cute.
He adores her,
That's so
but
cute.
in order, even though they love each other so much, it's really important to understand when to use management, when to separate them. Because as much as I love my husband, I mean, even I want a break sometime, right? Even
Yeah.
though we do well together, we're all individuals. And so I think
Yeah.
allowing the puppies and the adult dogs that
Yeah.
might already be living with us that opportunity to take a breath, to rest without being disturbed,
Yeah.
is something that really does go a long way in terms of letting the dogs coexist peacefully,
Yes.
for the rest of their life.
And with these dogs, with any dog, you want to push that they have individuality. A lot of the times when we have two dogs in the home, they kind of become a unit, and they almost kind of push you out of it a little bit. And
Mhm.
so what I wanted Dahlia to be is her eyes out on adventures, because Darla really does follow Dahlia in a sense. Okay, you're moving here, so it's safe. I'm going to move here. And that's
Yeah.
amazing. But I don't want her to be her eyes for everything. I want to be her eyes for a lot of
Right.
things. And I want her to rely and trust on me as well. So that's one thing I also want to point out is, if you are thinking about bringing home a puppy with an impairment, please do not go into it with, well, my older dog, or the original dog in the home, loves other dogs, and she'll just, teach her everything and show her
Right.
around. And don't put all of that responsibility on your other dog. They deserve a break. Even if they love each other, that's, it's good to have some individuality and have you also be a major component in that aspect.
Yeah. And as much as we don't want to talk about it, that older dog isn't going to be around forever. And so it's
Yeah.
important that those puppies learn how to exist independently from
Yes.
the other dog and exist with our assistance as well.
Yes, and especially you see these blind and deaf dogs just link up with these other dogs
Hmm.
so much that we see it here. As much as Dahlia and Darla aren't, like this.
Hmm.
I don't think I could leave Darla alone by herself in the house. And I mean, she's crate trained, she's great, but I think just the scent of Dahlia next to her in the kennel is
Hmm.
she can be in there for quite some time. It's no problem. But if it was just her, we've come home to her like howling a couple of times. And
Yeah.
that's when we learned scent is
Yeah.
huge. I
Huge.
mean, we knew with Darla we don't, as dirty as this sounds, we don't wash her blankets very much, but we'll get to that because it's a huge part of training. But there is a difference. She knows when Dahlia is physically in her kennel or not, whether the blankets smell from a couple months ago or not.
That's
And
interesting.
that article that we all talked about in the pandemic group with how they can sense heat, and
Hmm.
that I really do notice that with Darla, especially like I said in the example of the kennels, because their kennels are kind of right next to each other, not too close, but and she can really tell the difference whether Dahlia is physically in it or not.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's really interesting. So let's jump into some of the training. We talked a
Yeah.
little bit about how important management is and kind of setting up the home. Um,
Hmm.
Obviously, we're still doing positive reinforcement training, which is super important to boost confidence and help them feel comfortable. But for our dogs without sight, our dogs without hearing, we're using different kinds of markers with them. So talk to us a little bit about, for example, like what I've seen you do with your pup.
Yeah, so let's use Darla as the example, but know that anything I talk about can be transferred to a hand signal. So I'm mostly going to focus on touch cues, and I'll refer to some hand signals as well, especially in the case of if you have a dog like Darla who can't see at all and can kind of hear, and a dog who like Dahlia who can see and hear. I like to have two different languages for both
Mhm.
so that they don't think they're the same dog. Um, so what we noted right off the bat, what I wanted to make sure I had was a marker cue. And the biggest thing I had to make sure is the marker cue didn't startle her. So
Yeah.
there's all different kinds. The biggest thing I push with my clients is it doesn't have to be a universal cue. You need to experiment actually for the first week or so in figuring out what part of their body isn't going to startle them. So I started off with a little tap on her shoulder, but what would happen is she would go like this.
Oh,
And that's not what I wanted for a marker cue.
right.
So then I tried right here, and it would always make her go like this. So I really, the first week, had to very much experiment. And the only thing that really kept her kind of just like going like this and staying with me is a gentle boop on the nose.
Mhm.
Um, it's unique. This doesn't work for every dog. Some dogs that I've recommended this to, they'll look up and
Yeah.
so some of my clients try a little boop on the chest. There's all different things. The biggest thing I can recommend is you have to experiment, and you can get creative as creative as you want to. So what we did for the first 2 weeks is that's all I trained is I managed her. We did potty stuff, but sit down, all of that aside, we just nailed home the marker cue.
Mhm.
We would just have sessions of boop and treat and boop and treat. Another way that I established the marker cue was to practice soft petting. So
Mhm.
one thing you really want to start off with these guys is because their touch sense or their feeling of touch is so heightened.
Mhm.
Hands can't be a startling factor. So you
Right.
want to normalize hands going up and down. And you would do this with any puppy, but you really want to focus on, I would say, this first.
Right.
So really stroking them, petting them. It also helps with puppy biting and that my hands
Mhm.
don't equal. So, and really marking those really successful pets. Then that's when we started moving to the sits and the down. So sit was pretty easy and is pretty universal. It's a double tap on her butt, and really, I would say she just naturally picked it up, and a lot of these guys do. They kind of are like, okay, I guess you want me to do something with that. And as soon as they go to the ground, that marker cue. But what happens is a lot of people start off with the sit, or a lot of people start with stay, and they don't have that marker cue established.
Mhm.
So the dog's just kind of like did I do it? Okay, I got the
Yeah.
treat. I guess I can get up now, you know? So I want to make sure our communication is just so black and white. I don't want to leave a lot of gray area. I want to make sure you sit down now, you get up here, you follow me here, you know.
Mhm.
So once I established the sit, I wanted to give some type of, okay, you can get up, or free dog really is
Right.
what it is. And that's really the next thing I would really encourage, is some type of follow me, free dog, you know, you can get up now kind of cue. And the easiest thing to do that is to have excitement in your hand. So
Mhm.
sometimes some dogs you can like scratch their shoulders and they'll come up. We do a double swipe under the chin, and everything is always followed by the marker cue. So after everything I've asked her, it's always, yep, that's what I wanted, and marker cue and treat.
Mhm.
Your hands have to, this can go wrong quickly, because I'm asking you, if you think about it, I'm asking you to put your hands on your dog, and I'm asking you to add something so that something happens. And in dog trainer world, sometimes that can be a little Caesar Milani, you know, that can go wrong quickly. So
Yeah.
you have to have gentle hands.
Yeah,
You know,
that was
this is,
something I was envisioning when you were talking about your sit cue. Like, you're not pushing the dog into a sit. Just
mm-mm,
to clarify for everyone, it is the most gentle of
yes.
little touches, very slow, waiting for the dog to offer the behavior and then marking. And I think the
Yes.
other thing that I love what you were talking about teaching the marker first, really
Hmm.
making sure that's solid, and then slowly moving into those petting, because as anybody who has ever raised a puppy knows, we think we're getting this cute little puppy, and really sometimes we bring home like a little pterodactyl, right? Or a
Yes.
little T-Rex.
Yes.
And they can be so mouthy. And
So
so
mouthy.
if all of our cues to our dog, instead of saying sit, it's a gentle butt touch. If instead of clicking, we're tapping the bridge of the nose, right? Those are all things where we're putting hands on the dogs. And as we know, oftentimes that can be arousing, it can be exciting, and it can entice or encourage some of that biting behavior. So I love that from the start, very clearly making it known, this means, yes, you did a good job and you get a treat. And
Mm-hmm.
then I'm going to put my hands on you. And not only are you then counter conditioning and letting the puppy know touch is good,
Yeah.
right? By
Mm-hmm.
pairing the contact with the food, but you're also helping right off the bat let the dog know that hands on them is not an invitation to
Yeah.
start mouth.
Yeah. And you really have to, okay, say for instance, your dog, your puppy with an impairment gets into a scary situation. You have to be so mindful that you're going to go no, and you're going to, you know, your hands are all of a sudden going to have a ton of meaning to them,
Yeah.
and you have to be very hyper aware of that. So
Yep.
the next thing that I really push is body handling. You have to get them used to, you know, stroking their legs and touching their feet and grabbing their collar. You know, you
Mhm.
have to, and you want to do it in all, I want to say this in the right way, you have to do it in all different levels without um, being too much, if that kind of makes any sense. You know,
Yeah.
you want to go from light to more pressure to you're still being a good dog to a little bit more pressure, but we're not like sit, you know, we're not, you know, you have to be very hyper aware of your touch, and you have to get them used to different levels of touch, because yes, there is going to be a moment that is going to
Mhm.
be scary. We have had it before, and I truly believe if we didn't practice all of those different levels of touch, that if I went to go grab her collar, that she wouldn't turn around and maybe try and nip at me because it scared her so much or it startled
Yeah.
her so much. So that's another thing, is you have to be mindful of the different levels of touch without being aggressive whatsoever
Yep.
towards your puppy.
Yep. So slowly getting them used to starting with just the gentlest of, hands on the outside of the collar, the
Yep.
outside of the neck, the outside of the harness. But then as the dog is comfortable, we're not seeing any stress signals, they're doing well,
Yep.
slowly increasing how much contact, duration, pressure, how we're touching the harness, maybe starting to put fingers between the dog and the harness so that we're slowly teaching them that contact with them is good,
Yep.
and even contact with a little bit more pressure is good.
Yeah.
So that when that oops moment happens, or when that, oh, yikes, I had to, quickly grab the harness of my dog to prevent something bad from happening, it's not startling enough to the point that it's going to set you back with all of that important,
Yeah.
non-startle contact that you've done.
Because we see this all the time in rescue. Oh, he must have been hit or he must have been something like that. And say the puppy had never been hit and, actually had a very well rounded puppyhood. It's probably because no one practiced hands on them and no
Yep.
one practiced those different levels of touch to get them used to that. And it does come off like, ooh, don't put, it does come off like maybe they had been hit, but it's, or spanked or something like that. But it's just a matter of I've never actually been used to different levels of hands of pressure on me before.
Mm-hmm. Now, for all of our cues, if the dog has some vision, we're maybe using some visual signals like a hand signal, where you're using a tactile marker instead of your click to tell the puppy, yes, that's what I want, and a treat is coming. Are
Yep.
you still going for tactile even if the dog has some hearing, or will you start to use a verbal marker or, clicker at all with them?
It depends. So let's reverse that a little bit. So if the dog has absolutely no hearing but can see really well, I actually stick to hand signals
Okay.
because you've got you have vision. They can see, and you. So there, the training kind of takes a little bit of a curve. So things you really want to start off right off the bat is check-ins. If I had and we are at some point when Dahlia kind of retires, we will be getting just a deaf puppy. But right now I practice with just Dahlia as being my deaf dog. But
Mhm.
it's all it's all timing at that point. So
Yeah.
you're using, and that's the other thing I want to say is if you have just a deaf dog, they can see, then you have to really pre-plan your hand signals or you're going to mumble jumble all the time.
Mhm.
So for instance, you may have oh, you're such a good girl, I love you so much, and then this is yes. So you
Mhm.
have to have differences of, some people might use thumbs up for everything, which you need to decipher when you're in a training situation or
Right.
we're marking something I want to keep happening versus you're such a good girl, I love you so much.
Right.
um, so so like I said, with that question kind of molding it a little bit is I want to make sure that if the dog is just deaf, then yes, I want to go off of hand signals because you have kind of more range. You can have a
Right.
check-in from far away where you might not be able to do that with a blind dog. Now with in Darla's case, who's fully blind, and I do have some hearing, I use I use the tactile training most of the time.
Yep.
I will say I use her hearing for recall because it's all, it's helpful.
Yeah. Yeah.
I use the hearing for, and honestly, she uses her hearing pretty well. That's how she knows where other dogs are. She knows when I'm scooping her dinner, So,
Yeah.
but I will say it is so spotty. Like if it's really windy out, she can't figure out where I'm at. You will literally watch her put her nose up and try to figure out where I am, but it's just not there. So
Mhm.
when we're out in real life, I don't want to bank on the hearing in
That makes
case,
sense.
like something, she gets away from me or something like that. So she's always on a long line and we use pressure with trying
Mm.
to, get her to check in. That does lead me a little bit to the discussion of vibration collars. People have asked me about them.
Mm.
I don't train with things that I don't work with. So is it an avenue you can take? Yes. But so a trainer told me this one time to never advocate for something you don't work with. So I don't work with vibration collars. I feel as though I'd rather put the foundation work in and not rely on a machine to tell my dog when to come back, whether it works or not.
Yep.
Um, and so that's just, I do kind of, people always give me that
Yeah.
question. And I
Yeah.
just don't advocate, I don't give advice on things I don't personally work with.
Yeah. And for anyone who's listening, that we're not talking about a shock collar. It's a
Yeah.
collar that just
Thank you.
creates a little vibration. I imagine though that if we are unaware of our surroundings to some extent because we have impairments, I imagine that that could go the wrong way quickly
Very quickly.
with giving the dog vibration where they don't know where it's coming from, or oh my gosh, there's something on my neck, or right, kind of
Especially
creating a little fallout.
Yeah, especially if your dog is prone to seizures. That
Yeah.
makes me way too nervous
Yeah.
because stress can cause a seizure. So if they don't know
Right.
where that's coming from, and you're out in the elements, and your dog goes into one, that would be like my biggest nightmare. So yeah, I'm glad you reiterated. Not a shock collar. There are just vibration collars out there. And it's like I said, it can go wrong very quickly if not trained appropriately. There are tons of blogs out there on how to do it, but I think that laying the foundation, like if you really dedicate that first year, say, you
Yeah.
give yourself that time frame that we're just going to do simply check-ins on a 30-foot long line all the time. um, I will say you do have to consider when bringing home these dogs, this dog may never be off leash. I mean, that's
Yeah.
just a simple fact,
Let's
and
let's be real though, a lot of
yeah.
dogs are never gonna be off
Yes.
leash, even dogs that have full vision and full hearing, so
Exactly, exactly. So that's something you're right, when bringing home any dog you have to
yeah.
think about, but it's definitely something you have to consider is that, are you okay with that? And are
Mhm.
you, yeah, if you're not, this may not be the dog for you.
Yeah. I think it would also be important to look at your individual home setup, where you live, city versus
Yep.
having more space,
Yeah.
kids, quantity, energy levels. I imagine that even if one would like to bring home a puppy like this, I imagine that there are certain environments that are not very conducive to raising a puppy in
And
that environment.
thinking about the future, you see these, and this is what happens, these puppies get adopted and then teenagehood happens. And I'd like to
Yeah.
talk a little bit about some of the things you see in teenagehood, because there can be very alarming behavioral um, issues that happen.
Yeah.
Spinning is a big one, and spinning is, it can be a part of a neurological issue. It can be a stress outlet. It can be just a coping mechanism of how, if
Mhm.
when things are stressful in that moment, spinning happens. And a lot of people just aren't ready to financially put in the time for training, and just trying to work with a veterinary behaviorist. A lot of these dogs do well on medication. Darla
Mhm.
is on medication, and it has significantly made training sink in a little bit more. I think that
Right.
fear factor was blocking us from training to sink in. Um, so that's and then when they're teenagers, they get returned, and you see these rescues just have all these teenagers because people weren't planning for the future. They weren't planning
Right.
for, oh, we are going to have kids in a couple years. How's that going to be with a deaf and blind dog?
Yeah.
My partner Jane and I are planning to have a family, and we are talking about it now to prepare. How do we get Darla ready? How do
Yeah.
we? And this is like 3 years from now. When
Yeah.
we're ready to have kids. So it's it's definitely something that this is, and I think you really have to think about this with any dog,
Yeah.
but when you bring home these types of dogs, you significantly need to think about the future.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about that future. I know for anyone watching that wants to kind of understand the basics of teenage behavior, Camille joined me, was it last week or the week before, on this? And so we actually have two different lives where we talk about teenagers and impulse control
Awesome.
and some of those changes. So you guys can dive into that. But while some of the changes are the same
Mhm.
because dogs are going through the same developmental stage, I imagine that there is quite a bit that is different as well.
Yeah, and like I said, you just start to see they startle more easily. They the spinning can start to happen. I had a foster, and this is how people started to get to know me, what off of social media, was I had a foster named Ghost, and I had him for about 8 months, and he was one of the most horrific spinners that I have ever seen. And it's a coping mechanism for them, and it's a now his, I still believe to this day, was a neurological issue because he always spun to the right and he always tilted 45 degrees,
Interesting.
and it was consistent every
Yeah.
time. When I was learning about these dogs, he was my teacher pretty much, and I went about it wrong. I'm just going to openly admit that when he spun, in certain times of the day, I was like, oh, you have to go potty. Oh, you have to eat. So I almost encouraged his
Right.
that way of communication. He was trying to tell me, oh, I really have to go right now, or I'm really hungry right now. So looking back, you learn from it, and you do want to try and interrupt those behaviors and try to redirect into something else. But in the long term, medication really helped with that with him.
Yeah.
So um, That is what I see the most, is that they start to find coping mechanisms in stressful situations that are kind of unique than the average teenage dog. They still bark, lunge, feel the feels, and sometimes feel stronger feels, but
Mhm.
just know that their triggers most of the time are going to be scent or change in environment that where they don't recognize a scent.
Right.
And that is what you really have to keep in mind. That's why when we travel, I'm going to be doing a whole webinar on this, but when we travel, we literally bring her most stinkiest of blankets. We bring the most recognizable toys so that there's some familiarity there of where she
Right.
is. And so because she'll pace, she'll be like, okay, I don't really understand where I am. I can't smell anything that I recognize. So that's, kind of,
Increases their anxiety level.
yeah.
Yeah. I think that's smart to bring familiar things and to understand that they do experience the world different because, when we think about coping mechanisms in dogs too, so let's say frustration, we can, even with dogs without or puppies without impairments, we can see spinning as kind of a frustration thing. And you always have to balance that line of, I see that something's happening. I've addressed that this is a result of frustration or needs not being met. And your goal is to make it better, right? We
Yeah.
want to jump in, help the behavior stop and get them to a better place. But oftentimes that can accidentally lead us into reinforcing undesired behaviors or creating unwanted chains. So when you do see that behavior, how are you generally interrupting it? Because my positive interrupters are their noises, right?
Yeah.
Like I clap, I make a bop, 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 and that's the dogs know to stop, look at mom, and we're going to do something else. So, how are you interrupting? Let's say, for example, with Ghost that you were talking about, what was your interrupter?
So at the time, I was still really learning everything about deaf and blind dogs, and I want to put it out there with Ghost. I sought out help towards the end
Yep.
of his fostering. By 8 months, I didn't know how to help him anymore, and I think there was a lot of self. I don't want to say loathing, but there was a lot of. I was really hard on myself about it. I cherished this dog, and I felt like I somewhat failed him. We still keep it. The relationship is much better now. I speak with his family, but at the time, what I should have done is an interruption cue or an interrupter cue. So for Darla, so I'll go to kind of her and how I apply an interruption cue. Is that it's a cue to let them basically know to check back in with you, to kind
Mhm.
of stop what they're doing and to check back in with you. So usually, what you do is what I tell people is if my shoulders were my hips or a dog's back hips, you want to tap on the side in which the direction you want them to go. So, for instance, if I'm get my hand in the camera. If I'm kind of right here, I'm going to double tap this shoulder so that she turns in that direction. I can give her the maybe follow me, or they, kind of come where I am, and then ask a different cue, bridge that cue. Because what tends to happen is it's kind of like jumping. Is I jump, you tell me to sit, I get a treat. I jump, you tell me to sit, I get a treat. So you have to break the cycle.
Right.
Um, Now, spinning is a bigger issue. If the
Yep.
dog is just so stuck in the spinning, you need to seek out help. Things that I have seen help as well are thunder shirts in the moment. I actually have not seen much success with thunder shirts with thunder, but I actually have seen a lot of success with thunder shirts in this situation. So Darla does really well with hers. Ghost did really well with his, and I think it's that pressure,
Yeah.
that just like when Temple Grandin squeeze machine,
Right.
it's kind of the same concept, right?
Yep.
They're in a sensory overload, and so you are trying to do your best to interrupt it, to help it, and then to give them something else.
Yep.
If the interruption cue works, great. Continue using it. It always needs to be rewarded. I
Hmm.
always want to tell people, you're not just poking your dog to stop. That's not what this is. It
Yeah.
needs to be rewarded. You need to follow up with a bridge of another cue before they go back into the cycle
Mhm.
again. And then, like I said, if they go back into the cycle, you're looking at a little bit of a bigger issue. And when I say issue, it's more so just journal it a little bit. When do they spin? How often do they spin? Do they do it in a certain direction? That's what we did with Ghost. Is I just took notes of when it would all happen and why maybe it might happen. And when I finally went to Dr. Pockel's office in Portland, that's who I took him to, and I saw a different veterinary behaviorist there, but she literally said to me, she's like, well, you have so many notes. This is so
Yeah.
helpful. And so that's really another thing, is learn, what are they trying to communicate with you? Are they in sensory overload? What's happening with that?
Hmm.
And try not to just think they're being neurotic
Right.
is the
Yeah.
biggest thing.
Yeah, I think that's huge. Now, one of the ways that we help support all of our dogs, and I'm big on this with my channel, is enrichment.
Yes.
Food enrichment, environmental enrichment, making sure that we give them opportunities to decompress, we give them opportunities to have fun, because enrichment really is kind of that big picture on making sure that they are living a very fulfilled life.
Yeah.
Do you approach enrichment the same? Do you
Pretty
approach
much.
enrichment differently? Okay.
It's all scent based. So I pretty much, I would say I use more enrichment with deaf and blind puppies, maybe more than any other puppy. Because
Hmm.
with Dahlia, I could take her out and play and do tug,
Yeah.
and with I would say with Darla, every day is some type of enrichment activity to keep her mind going.
Hmm.
That's the other really important thing about these dogs, is keep their minds going, keep training them, keep teaching them things. It helps, especially if your dog has seizures, to keep the mind going. That's, every vet always says training is really good for dogs that are prone to seizures, because you just want to keep their mind enriched.
Right.
So we find that, yes, scent-based enrichment, whether it's go find the toy. We do treat bombs, because it's
Mhm.
like, she literally has to try and search them out. We do cardboard boxes all the time. We joke when she was a puppy that she was a trash puppy, because we would like, I wanted her used to different textures, and she would get so loud in her enrichment box with her juggling the bottles and everything, but she doesn't really startle to weird sounds now. So
Mhm.
um I use treat bombs in the grass all the time in a nervous situation. I bring puzzle toys with me if we can't really go in public, but if we go in the summertime when she was younger, we would sit at faraway tables while people were outside dining. And we would just have her eat her puzzle toy. We would sit there for 15 minutes, and then that was it. So
Mhm.
what sometimes happens is, if you rush the process, and with any dog, but if you rush the process with too much new smells, too much of a new environment, they will just shut down. And that's sometimes when you see the spinning. So enrichment for me, maybe sometimes it has even more of a part, or plays more of a part, because I want to desensitize life a little bit,
Right.
and so when we were out somewhere new in the snow, she didn't recognize that we were not in the backyard. So I brought a baby food pouch, and I would put it in different patches in the snow, so
Mhm.
that at least she would be like, oh, this is, okay, I can do this. And it
Right.
gave her something familiar and something yummy in a new environment. So
Yep.
that's really, I have so many Westpaws product just for Darla, because scent just plays such a huge part, and calming, and adding food, and things like
Mhm.
that.
Yeah. Yeah, I love that. And I think it's easy for us to I just did a video on enrichment and specifically focusing on creative ideas, because
Yeah,
I think there is something to be said about using Kongs regularly. And
yeah,
trust me, I have like Kongs, topples, like
yeah,
everything. And they're always stuffed and ready to go. But it's easy for us too to kind of just get sucked into using those regularly as,
yeah.
here, be busy while I do something, but
Exactly.
and that has value, don't get me wrong, that definitely
Hmm.
has value, but I think that for a puppy that might not be experiencing the world in the same way, you could even be more creative with using food to help boost confidence in new environments, to help
Yes.
them build positive associations with new places that don't smell the same, to help desensitize them or counter condition them even to different textures under their feet. So
Yep.
I see like a whole, a lot of ways to use enrichment, not just as I need you to be busy and out of trouble, do this, but also to incorporate it into, your training plans to really help them all
Well,
around.
and that's the thing too. It's such a good point, because when we, going back to the in public, sitting at that separate table, I I didn't want to do the marker cue and make her sit there and just kind of take it all in.
Right.
I
Right.
wanted this to, and I probably this summer will do the same exact thing. I want her to have something to do in these new environments and take in the small amounts of sounds and that she can hear and vibrations that she can smell and new smells, but that she's kind of counter conditioning herself like,
Mhm.
okay, this is okay. I'm
Right.
okay. Instead of being like, good girl, yes, you're doing it. Good girl, yes. I'm going to wait until we take it more into a formal setting like that.
Right.
Slow pace is key with these guys, and I just think that you really, really have to be mindful that their emotional bucket is going to
Mhm.
fill a lot faster than a lot of dogs,
Yeah.
and keeping them busy sometimes in new areas. When I had Ghost as a puppy, we went to go get my oil change, and I brought a smelly blanket, a little bit of a Kong wobble, and he was taking everything in while doing something that he
Mhm.
enjoyed. So that really helped taking him to new places.
Yep. Yep. I love that. Well, it seems like we've got a few people that have been
Yeah.
checking in that are maybe planning on bringing home their first impaired puppy. And then somebody else who's here, it looks like they have an older dog, which
Yeah.
I know you probably have different advice for. So first off, any tips for somebody who's looking at, besides, of course, all the wealth of information you just gave us, any tips on, things to think about as they start to bring home, their first puppy with impairments?
Yeah, so something to think about. This is a great question. I saw this a little bit earlier. Is yeah, just thinking about your house, sharp corners, wood stoves, stairs, management. I would start off in some type of puppy playpen first. I wouldn't give your puppy free range of the whole house quite yet. That's a lot to intake.
Mhm.
Take it in strides. You want them to map it out. You want them to have independence, but let's not overflow them or overfill them at first. So a puppy playpen would be great. That would be for any puppy that we would
Yeah.
recommend. You want to consider, like we talked about, soft petting. You want to consider establishing a good boy or good girl marker cue, body handling, getting used
Mhm.
to the collar, getting used to being, if they're small enough, picked up, just handled, and just taking things. The biggest thing I want to say is do not baby these dogs. You want them to be independent. You want to reward independence and curiosity, but
Mhm.
assist them, help them out. It's not a free for all, but,
Yeah.
um, just don't coddle them is the
Yep.
biggest thing. Let them explore, let them scrape their knee every once in a while, let them bump into something, they'll figure it out. They're not dumb. That's the biggest
Right.
thing, is they're definitely not dumb dogs. If anything, I think she's smarter than I am sometimes. So that would be my biggest thing. And then really just prep for teenagehood. So,
Mhm.
parking lots, let them smell parking lots. Don't take them right into a store right away. Let them, my biggest suggestion is to also get something on them that says, I am deaf, or I am
Yeah.
blind, or I am
Don't
deaf and
touch.
blind. So, yeah, yeah, so that people don't just bombard them. You want to have an appropriate way that people say hi to them, or you're inevitably going to cause fear of
Mhm.
hands and new smells and people coming near them. So, the other thing is, don't go into a high pitched voice of, "Oh, there's someone coming to say hi," because that will trigger them to now jump up and down and get super crazy. So,
Mhm.
really prepare for greetings that way, and very much be selective of who you're introducing these dogs to. Make sure you have a friend that you really trust that has a more relaxed dog. Don't just, like I said, you want these dogs to learn from other dogs, but they do not need to get their butts kicked in the
Yeah.
process. That's a really important part. So that
Yeah.
the first month, I would say that's what you're really going to focus on, or first couple months.
Yep, I like that. Now, it looks like we have someone who's tuning in who has an older dog that might
Yeah,
be starting to lose vision. I imagine that going about working with those dogs is a little different and might require some,
it is.
training guidance.
It is, and I kind of feel for these guys more. I
Yeah.
love my deaf and blind puppies. Don't get me wrong, but they don't know they're any different.
Yeah.
They think everybody's deaf and blind. So I really feel for these dogs. They got to see the world. They got to
Mhm.
hear the world. So you really have to help these guys out. Now, one thing that is helpful for a product for this type of dog is called a halo. So a halo is now you'd have to condition it, but a
Mhm.
halo is a piece of equipment that can kind of come out and
Mhm.
help the dog from really running into things. You do find that these dogs tend to run into things a little bit more because they're not forced to right away map their settings. They feel like they can still kind of see it. So right away, touch cues. Even if you are like, well, she still has some sight or some hearing, just act like they're deaf and blind. Just go
Yeah.
right into the good boy or good girl marker cue. Practice a new sit. Practice a new down. Usually I down with, swiping the leg. There's tons of videos on how to get started with some of these touch cues from different rescues. I have a training page called Speak St. Louis training support with Down to Earth Doglady, and I give a lot of beginning stuff. But that's what I would start with: is a way is you have the chance to teach a whole new way to communicate with your
Yeah.
dog. And I would go ahead and just get started. So yes, yes dog, a new sit, maybe a follow me.
Mhm.
If they're on a walk with you and they're staying loose leash, reward them every once in a while. You're doing such a good job. If they smell something they're not sure about and their body posture gets stiff, back up a couple steps, reward the loose with the new marker cue, the loose body
Yep.
language. So really, once again, that yes dog is gonna be your lifesaver, and that's
Yeah.
really where I would start.
Yep. I think that's great. And starting now, don't wait till we've lost all vision or all hearing to get started
Don't
on that
wait.
process.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
the biggest advice is do not wait until they lose the other sense. Just
Yeah.
kind of mentally act like it's more of a cool thing that they still have some eyesight or some hearing, but that inevitably they don't. Think of it
Yeah.
that they don't.
Yeah. Well, Erin, thank you so
You
much.
are
This was
so
so
welcome.
wonderful. You gave out so much good advice for people. I really think it will help them. And I know that you've got some really awesome programs. So can you talk to us a little bit? I know we on the description for this video, we have your information for your website so people can go there. I know
Yeah.
you're also really active on social media. You have Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And guys, she's got a ton of great content out there already. So if you're living with a puppy with impairments or planning on it, go over and follow her pages so that you can start to, peruse through some of the educational posts that she's done already. But you also have opportunities for people to work with you both in person and virtually. So can you talk to us about some of those?
Yeah, so like I said, I do have a Facebook page, training support, Speak St. Louis training support with the Down to Earth Dog Lady. Speak St. Louis is pretty much they focus on deaf and blind dog rescue. So I am working with them. I do, like I said, virtual consults. Right now, I am offering a program that I am taking on deaf and blind dog clients virtually for a very low price because I am hoping to create a web series that is dedicated to helping all walks of life be able to access information that in regards to deaf and blind dogs and helping support their dog through puppyhood, teenagehood, and adulthood. So that program will be ready by the summertime, but right now I'm offering some kind of teaser courses if you do currently have a deaf and blind dog on how to positively condition goggles onto your dog and
Mhm.
why you may want to consider goggles. And my next webinar in March and the beginning of April will be traveling with your deaf and blind dog and how to set them up for success. So all of those will in the next couple of weeks. We'll have links on my website that people can purchase or they can tune into the Zoom webinar live. And other than that, just like I said, tuning into those Facebook pages, Instagram, I post a ton of different things that
Mhm.
also has to do with non-deaf and blind dog training.
Yeah.
And then I did join Generation Z, and there is a TikTok, I can't believe it, that is dedicated to just Darla's story and deaf and blind dog
I love that.
tricks. So that's just something you guys can tune into as well, which you can all get the information for on my Instagram.
Excellent. Thank you so
Thank you
much
so
for
much,
joining us
Chelsea.
today. Hope this was helpful for everybody, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.
You too. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Yep.
Okay, bye.